Hey, how y'all doing? This is Mongo Slade, and today we're going to talk about WWE 24 Keith Lee. And I thought this was a fantastic documentary. I'm always leery of WWE doing documentaries on guys who are just at the beginning of their careers or is nowhere near the end, because it doesn't feel like a natural ending. Okay, like what makes a good documentary is seeing the story and knowing what the end of the story is, and backstage stuff. There's still multiple stories they could tell, but when you do documentaries for people who are in the middle of their careers or at the beginning of them, it's kind of weird. Like Keith Lee is my age. He's 36, 37 or something like that. But he is new to WWE. He's only been on the main roster for like a month or two. So you still have so much stuff to go through. And hell yeah, he has a hell of a story. Up till this point, he's got a really good story. I'm going to get into that in a moment. But it's still kind of weird for you to have a documentary celebrating the life of somebody that people barely know. And I think they kind of do these documentaries in lieu of doing vignettes. Like if you could have took this documentary, broke it up into vignettes over Raw, and just put like 4 or 5 clips, especially of his parents and of his struggle and stuff like that. If you'd put that stuff on Raw and then collected it together as a documentary, it would have been dope. I think that people would have appreciated this more as a series of vignettes, of a sit down vignette with with somebody like Michael Cole or Corey Graves or Charlie Caruso or Her Beautiful Lips. Just it would have been very good. It would have got him over. I think would have made a lot of people more interested. But instead, what WWE does is they put it behind a paywall. So then a lot of people, only people who are interested in Keith Lee as a person, will actually go and watch this full documentary. It's almost an hour. Okay. I am a big fan of Keith Lee since he came to NXT. I saw some of his stuff when he was in the independents. I don't really rate independent wrestlers. There's very few independent wrestlers I look at and be like, oh, I can't wait. Hopefully he gets signed. Because most of the time they just do matches. And they're cold matches against people I don't care about. But it has happened. Keith Lee was one of those guys I actually liked when I saw him on the Independents. Shane Strickland, who is Isaiah Swerve Scott, he was one of those guys I saw on the Independents. Most of the other guys I saw were Ring of Honor regulars. Adam Cole, Kyle O'Reilly, Bobby Fish, Roderick Strong, who I absolutely hated before he came to NXT. It was just something about NXT that fixed him and Kyle O'Reilly to me. Maybe they just brought out their personalities. But let's get into this Keith Lee thing. Because I think the Keith Lee documentary was really good. And it tells the story of even though you can be really good, wrestling is very hard to succeed in. So let's talk about this thing. So Keith Lee, the big story going into this thing is Keith Lee had tried out for WWE 3 different times and got rejected each time. That is an incredible statement. But usually, what people don't understand is that failure does teach you things, and that's kind of the message that goes through this. And when we get to that point, but I always tell people when you fail, you have to remember J.K. Rowling. She got rejected 12 times before Harry Potter really got accepted, and now she's a billionaire. It happens. Bob Marley sang the song, "The stone that the builder refused the stone that the builder refused is most often the cornerstone." I think it's from the Bible, but it's one of those biblical ideas that sometimes it's the guy that you didn't want who ends up being the most important person. The black sheep. So that's kind of the story of Keith Lee, that he was rejected 3 times, but we build up to that point. So we start with what made him fall in love with wrestling. And his mom basically says that we watched the Von Erichs, before he was even born. We were big fans of the Von Erichs. Her mother was actually a big wrestling fan. And he used to watch wrestling with her. And then she passed away. And I believe in 2009 she passed away. She passed away when he was 12 years old. They didn't say what year that was. If Keith Lee is my age, that means he would have been born in 84 or 85, maybe even 83, which means he would have been in the mid-90s. Okay, probably 95, 96 maybe. So when he was 12, his grandma died. And he talked about how he used to wrestle with his cousins on the big red pillow. And I thought that was so crazy because it reminded me a lot of me and my cousins used to wrestle in the front room. Like when me and my cousin used to wrestle, we used to watch WCW. That's the only time I watched WCW when I was a kid is when I watched it with my cousins, because they were WCW guys. Like I had seen Ric Flair because I knew he was Ric Flair from WWF. I didn't know he was in WCW before. I mean, before that. So when I first like got put in the figure four leg lock, it was by one of my older cousins. And I was like, oh, Ric Flair, this sucks. Figure four. But we had a big brown pillow that we used to do things on, like power bomb each other, DDT each other on this big blue pillow, me big brown pillow. And it was cool to see that Keith Lee had a big red pillow they used to do stuff on. And I think they're just grandmas, like even though that was my aunt's house, that just grandmas and older people like that would have like these big pillows for the couch. So that was really cool. I really kind of started seeing some of myself in Keith Lee a little bit as when he started talking about that. Even though my parents and stuff like that were never wrestling fans, I did have cousins and stuff that was into it. His parents separated when he was young, and he started getting into some trouble as a youth, and his mom sent him to live with his dad because he was living in the hood with his mom, and he was like, "This is not going to work." There were some really bad influences floating around. And so he got sent to live with his dad, which I think was a very smart thing. And you know what? I give his mom a hell of a lot of credit for giving him up and saying, you need to go live with your dad and you need that structure. You need that change of environment. His parents were very smart people. I loved them. Like, I for some reason, I just really like his parents, because I think very, very often about, especially moms who hold on to their kids, especially their sons, in these bad environments and refuse to let their dads, do what they're supposed to do and get in there and fix whatever problems there could be. Because Keith Lee, his dad would say like he would experience these things and he would never tell anybody, and that's how boys are, especially young men. You see crazy stuff, crazy shit happens, but you don't feel the need to go out and tell everybody. You keep it to yourself, but then you start to see things. And then sometimes you get broken and you just got like, oh, I got to tell somebody about this. And that's kind of how it happened is when he started talking, his dad said, I got to get my son out of this situation. And his dad cried. Like, I had to get my son out of the hood. He had to get out of there. And so he took him and got full custody of him. And then the first thing Keith Lee did when he became full custody with his dad is he put him in the football program. So Keith Lee started playing football. And he said he played fullback, and they used to call him the bus, like Jerome Bettis. I thought that was pretty cool, too. I wasn't a fan of Jerome Bettis, though, because I think he played for Pittsburgh. I'm from Detroit. I don't give a shit about the Steelers. Anyway, he said he quit playing football while he was in college. He quit college, too. He said he quit in his sophomore year. He wanted to be a pro wrestler. And he talked about how, his dad was unhappy with that. His dad hated that idea because he thought Keith Lee had this, this option of going to the NFL or making a lot of money. You had these, they didn't mention what college he went to, but I'm guessing it wasn't a big school because they would have mentioned it if it was. Like if it was a opportunity for him to go to be like a national champion or something like that, he probably wouldn't have quit. He probably wouldn't have quit. He probably would have powered through if there was a chance of him going to the NFL. But I guess there was no chance of him going to the NFL, so he just said forget it. He met Killer Tim Brooks in 2005, and he began his training. He wrestled in Independence around Texas. And this is where he met Eric of the Viking Raiders. He was based out of Dallas. Eric of Viking Raiders was based out of Houston, and they wrestled each other a bunch of times. And he was talking about how he was living out of his car at the time. And his father didn't know this either. His father did not know that he was homeless and that he was sleeping in Killer Tim Brooks' house. And he says that he was being paid $20 to wrestle at independent wrestling shows. And he said, like, he was working at a deficit because he had to pay for his own traveling. So he had to pay for his own gas. He had to pay for his own food, but he was doing it because he really, really wanted to wrestle. And it was the memory of his grandma that kept pushing him forward. Like he had made this sort of spiritual promise to his grandma that he was going to be a professional wrestler. And even though she wasn't around to see it, he felt beholden or obligated to actually do it. So he stuck with it. So he got his first WWE tryout in 2008. I don't know how old he would have been then, maybe 25 or something like that. maybe 26. And he said that Dusty told him that he sucked on the microphone and he had to go go learn how to cut promos, and he needed more seasoning. So then he says 2009 he got called from by WWE to be an extra. And he said he got called to be an extra in a segment between Legacy, which for people who don't remember was Cody Rhodes and Ted DiBiase Jr. and the McMahons. So that they were doing the Triple H, Vince McMahon, Shane McMahon angle with Legacy. And he was one of the extras that played security guard. And then he says that he was told by an official at WWE, he didn't say who, that he was going to get punched by Vince McMahon and he was supposed to go down. First punch, he's supposed to go down. So he did what he was told. And then he said Vince looked surprised when he went down from one punch because he was the biggest of the guys out there. And that, then he got singled out because he had flopped, far too soon. And then Triple H, of course, and Vince and all those guys beat him up. They threw him all over the place. And he was like, oh, what did I do to deserve this? But it was pretty funny. And it was nice. I love when I see these guys had worked as extras in WWE before, and now they're like stars there. Because it makes everything so poetic. Like that's such a poetic thing. Especially when we get to the fact that he made his Raw debut against Randy Orton. And he was an extra as part of a Randy Orton storyline 10 years prior. Like, that's amazing stuff. Like, telling man, hard work and these are very conservative stories. Most people will never understand it. Maybe even the wrestlers themselves don't understand it, but this is a conservative story. It's not a progressive story. This is a guy who, lived in the hood, who worked out of his car, bust his ass, and through perseverance and hard work, he was denied, and came back. I love these stories. Anyway, he met Mick Foley in 2009. He got he got put with the Sacco. He talked about how horrible it was. And he said he pulled Mick to the side in 2009 and asked him, what do you think I'm missing? Why do you think I got denied as a talent? And then Mick says, you need to do whatever you can to stand out. And if you stand out long enough, WWE will come looking for you. And then he says in 2011, he got his second tryout. And Regal said that, that he thought that Keith Lee was good, but that he needed more seasoning. So he rejected him. And that was rough. Then he got his third tryout in 2013. And then he says this was the first Performance Center tryout because this is the Performance Center was created. And he talked about it being a let's see if we can make you quit type of tryout. That it wasn't a let's see what we can do, but that it was sort of a punishing gauntlet-like situation. And he said this is where Bask in My Glory came from. Because Dusty said to him, you have a presence I can literally bask in. So that's when he morphed that to Bask in My Glory. But then he got rejected because William Regal said that, rejection was good for him. He wasn't ready yet. And he knew that he couldn't break his spirit by just rejecting him, so he rejected him. His promos was actually very bad too. They show clips because WWE records these promos for these documentaries, and his promos were really bad. They were terrible. All three of them. Like they showed all three of his tryouts. He was not good. So that's why he got rejected. So Adam Cole was on there. And Adam Cole talked about WWE rejecting him twice. He's like, it's heartbreaking because I got rejected twice before I got here. It crushes your confidence. It makes you rethink are you actually any good? And then he says after you fall down and you break down and you have that crisis of confidence, then you begin to say, screw them. I am going to prove them wrong. I'm going to make them regret that they didn't sign me. And he said that's what happened with Keith Lee. That after he got through the whole crushing of his confidence that all these failures gave him, he, on the other side of that, he became more focused, more confident in himself that he really is good, and he didn't really need the WWE validation. So I thought that was pretty cool. So then he said that, maybe he thought his dad was right at first. And then he had this match with Donovan Dijak in 2016 at Beyond Wrestling when he finally started to leave Texas and go around the country and do independent wrestling. And he had this high flying match with Donovan Dijak to show off his athleticism. And he said within 48 hours, it was like his career had changed after this match with Donovan Dijak. That all of a sudden he was everywhere. He was being asked to do all these different tours and all these different shows. And he was going out there showing up, showing out, wrecking shop, really becoming a big star. And then he said Mark Henry heard about him in 2018. And he said that he heard about this big kid who could do all this athletic stuff. And then, he says that when WWE rejected him all these times, he kind of just forgot about it and wanted to go to Japan. And then he says he got, the call from WWE to come and try out again. And he said, well, yeah, I had this, my new goal was to go to Japan. My old goal was to go to WWE. And then he said he had to make a decision. And he made the decision to go to WWE, where he had to prove that he was worthy the whole time, that they had been wrong all these years. Now, at this point, Keith Lee is 34, 35 years old. So, he's talking about, he's worried about his readiness. He's worried about his confidence. And he said that came from his first year in NXT because he got the big, in the crowd thing that they used to do in NXT back when they were, debuting new people in the crowd, back when there were crowds. And he talked about his first year in NXT being really rough because he wasn't being utilized to his fullest extent. He didn't feel like he was being used. Basically, he was in his eat shit and love it space that everybody goes through in NXT. They did it to Adam Cole too, where they beat him like a drum for like 6 months before they really started to push him. They currently doing that to like Swerve and and Jake Atlas, and they did it to Kushida. They do it to everybody. WWE has got a big problem with trying to correct, make people humble in that way. Let's put it like that. By basically putting you in positions where you just become a job guy. And you think that's your position. And sometimes guys freak out and they quit, or they freak out and they give up. And I think that's really what they were trying to do, is they were testing you. But they don't just say that we're testing you. Because Scott Hall talked about this. Scott Hall said that, when Vince McMahon would bring guys in the 90s and they would have like a high opinion of themselves, Vince would just beat them on TV. Just beat them. And if they complained, he beat them again. And if they complained, he just beat them and beat them and beat them until they stopped complaining. And, it forces you to be humble and respect the people in the locker room, that you're not above them, that you have to earn their respect. And Scott Hall is often known as somebody who stirs the pot and really is, up to no good at all, all the time. But that sounds like something Vince McMahon does, because I've seen him do it. Like, I've literally watched him beat guys who come in as stars. Like, he drags them for a while, lets them collect. Like, he does it to, he didn't do it to AJ Styles, of course. For some reason, AJ Styles just got it. And I know a lot of people said that, like, AJ just gets it. So AJ won the title in his first year, essentially, because he understood what WWE wanted from him. And he seemed to be a little bit more humble. But other people, sometimes their confidence gets broken and they just give up, and that's how they just float in the mid card. But other people get remotivated. Again, they did this with Chris Jericho, right? Chris Jericho talked about it in his documentary. He's talked about it all the time, that when he came to WWE, he thought he was ready. But then Vince just kind of shit on him, like, all the time. Like, talking about how his performances weren't shit, how, his promo, he didn't know what the hell he bought with Chris Jericho, how he just ripped Jericho all the time. And that he would leave Jericho off the card sometimes, even though he was healthy. And basically Jericho had to, he put a governor with Jericho to make sure that he could work. And the governor ended up being Sean Waltman. That, if you can't have good matches with Sean Waltman, then I'm going to fire you. And he said basically Sean Waltman had to teach him how to work a WWE style. Similarly, Scott Hall also tells a story about Ric Flair going through the same thing. That the infamous story of Vince McMahon chewing out Macho Man and Ric Flair and forcing him to have a whole match all over again. It happened because Ric Flair could not work the WWE style. That, Vince basically canceled their match in the middle of the match, called it off, and then forced them to do the whole match all over again, the way he told them to do it. This is fucking Macho Man and Ric Flair that Vince McMahon did this to. Macho Man Randy Savage, one of the greatest of all time. He canceled his match in the middle of the match and made him do it over. And so the idea that Vince is going to make you eat shit, that's a WWE trademark, man. They are good for it. They don't let people come in and get over on them. Sometimes people do come in and get over, like Brock. Brock came in and kind of got over, but you see what Brock did. Like, he came in, got over, and left. That's why they kind of beat him as soon as he came back. 2012, like, you would think Brock would come back and win his first match. No, he lost his first match. Kind of like, fuck you for leaving the first time. But that's kind of a WWE thing. And Keith Lee says that, it pretty much broke his confidence because he didn't know what was going on. He had came in so highly touted, and then he didn't feel like he was being pushed or used properly. And so his first year in NXT was really tough. He talked about Terry Taylor, the Taylor-made man, really helping him stay motivated, stay focused. And then he met Mia Yim in Orlando, and they started dating and stuff like that. So he had, friends, and, he was starting to learn the system and learn about the different people. And then, he said he felt like he started having his breakout moments at Survivor Series, where he had the big match where he was one of the last guys eliminated by Roman Reigns, and he had the fist bump, and then that kind of led to the train of him being a big star, winning the North American Championship, and being in the Royal Rumble, standing there with Brock, and ultimately winning the NXT Championship. So basically, he just says, hey, all of this stuff happened because of my showing at Survivor Series, and that everybody was so supportive of me, and that was so awesome. So there was two other things that I mentioned in here. One, they took a sidebar to talk about COVID, about how he knew about 9 people who died from COVID. They also did some Black Lives Matter propaganda, where he talked about the Black Lives Matter jacket and how he said he personally experienced the racism in the United States and all this type of stuff. And he wore that not to attack anybody, but as a message to people who experience this racism, that he stands with them, or that he sees them and recognizes their struggles. And I was just like, roll my eyes. Anyway, he talked about in June 2020, he was one of the Killer Tim Brooks was dying, and he had to travel to Texas to see him in the middle of the pandemic with the North American Championship, and that he wanted to talk to him to see if he was proud of him. And I thought, like, that's some really sweet stuff, because Killer Tim Brooks was really sick at the time. For people who don't know, Killer Tim Brooks was a wrestler in WCCW, which is World Class Championship Wrestling. He worked around Texas. He worked with Divine Erickson and all those people. So he was a really old guy, and he died. And then he said a few days after he died, that's when he found out he was going to be wrestling Adam Cole for the NXT Championship at the Great American Bash event on TV. And he won the title, and he had dedicated the match to Killer Tim Brooks. And it was just a few days after his funeral. And he says once he was a double champion, essentially he had hit the ceiling. He needed something else to do. And so, they told the audience that was there, Triple H did, that Keith Lee was being called up. He didn't know he was going to Raw or SmackDown, but he needed to get out of there. So, and Keith Lee said he welcomed it because he needed new goals. Like, he had reached the top of NXT. So he needed sort of a new goal. And then he said he thought he was going to have time to get new gear and change some things and all this stuff. He thought they were going to give him some time off, to get things together, kind of like they did with Vanessa Bourne and Chelsea Green and all these other people who, when they were called up, they just basically disappeared for weeks. But instead, they put him right back on the show right after SummerSlam. And he admitted that the NXT audience is different from the Raw and SmackDown audience, and that he needed to learn, and that he needs to take his time to learn the cameras and learn the people, because he knew everybody in NXT. He had spent so much time there. He knew the camera guys, he knew how they work, he knew the producers and everything. So he had to learn how to do his job. And so he says that's basically what he's doing now, is he wants to learn the job, to be more efficient at the job, to do the job very well. And he said he got to come in there and work against Randy Orton in his very first match. And he wanted to prove himself. And he said he felt like it was a valuable experience. And then they showed what I watched these documentaries for. And that is the Vince McMahon reaction to the performer. And Vince is jazzed up about Keith Lee. And he didn't get the big hug. The big hug wasn't there. He got the big handshake, though. So I don't know if Vince knows that he's being recorded, but he's talking about, he says, we're going to go places. Vince says this to Keith Lee, we're going to go places, but you have to make me believe. Make me believe in you. He says, we got a global audience, so it's different. Changes have to be made, but you just have to be you. And then he says, look what I got here. Look what I got here. Hell of an athlete. Hell of a performer. Good promo. And he was really excited about Keith Lee. And Keith said like it was like a football coach, in the old days when he used to play football, being fired up by a football coach. That's what it felt like. And that you could feel Vince McMahon's passion and, how he feels about the business and how he felt about him. You could feel that through his eyes and through his body language. And he says that, he's been expected to come in and crush the industry. And he has got to deliver. That's the expectations that Vince McMahon has put on him. And now he's got to deliver. And that's what he's focused on now. That's his new goal. So then Mark Henry says that, hey, Keith Lee is one of these guys where he's like a franchise player. But he says that, Keith Lee says that he's proud of everything that he's done so far, but he's not done yet. And I was like, good. That's awesome. That was fantastic stuff. It was a great documentary. Weird cutoff point because it seemed to cut off right at when he beat Randy Orton. I believe, what was that event? Backlash? Whatever that event was, he pinned Randy Orton. It stopped right there. So, but Keith Lee has sort of cooled since then. He's not as hot as he used to be because he started out at the top. So now he has to slide back into place. He's been off TV for a little while. A couple of weeks. I think he was in that triple threat match. He didn't win it. I think AJ Styles won it. But in any event, Keith Lee's had a hell of a run. Had a hell of a career. He's a hell of a guy. I like him. Black Lives Matter propaganda aside, it was a great documentary. It was fantastic stuff. And I finally learned what the fuck Michael Hayes does. Because they when he showed up on the screen, they showed his title. Michael Hayes is the Vice President of Creative Writing and Booking. The Vice President of Creative Writing and Booking. He is one of the bookers. Sweet. So we know. I know some people are gonna be like, of course everybody knew that. I'm like, I don't know that. There's 100 people back there, man. Like that's literally 100. Like I knew Michael Hayes was on the writing staff somewhere. I didn't know he was the vice president of the writing staff. I didn't know the writing staff had a president. Or do they have a treasurer? Do they have a secretary? Like, how big is this goddamn writing staff? But anyway, I learned a lot. I mean, I knew the story of Keith Lee a little bit from various promos and various other things that I've seen him involved in. But it was great to see it all in one place. I would have loved for this documentary to come out maybe after he won one of the big W's, or won the Royal Rumble or something like that, or right before WrestleMania. But I think that these things, the purpose of these little documentaries like this is to see if these people can draw, to see if people will actually come see things that are behind a paywall just for this guy. They didn't promote the hell out of this. They promoted the hell out of Liv Morgan. They didn't really promote this a lot. They talked about it, but they promoted the hell out of Liv Morgan. They didn't really promote WWE 24 Keith Lee, But I happened to see the clip of Vince talking to him, and I was like, you know what? I got to see this. I have to see this. And it was worth sitting down watching. It's worth sitting down an hour and watching. If you're a big fan of Keith Lee, this is worth watching. You probably already know a lot of this stuff. If you're not and you just want to get to know him, this would have been pretty good. I still think you should have broken this up into a series of vignettes as a way to, introduce him. Instead of doing one big documentary, you should have broke it down into a series of vignettes about, his, the vignette, a set of vignettes for about his childhood, then a set of vignettes about his football career and his dad, then a set of vignettes about his independent wrestling time, then a set of vignettes about his trips to NXT or his failures as far as WWE tryouts, and then his vignettes about his NXT career, and then you save all the Vince McMahon stuff for the actual documentary. But I think you could have did a good 5 weeks of vignettes out of this documentary that probably would have had people jazzed up ready for when he was about to come out. That would have been dope. So, but we got one big hour-long promo for Keith Lee, which was absolutely worth watching. So everybody should go out and watch it. Thank you guys for listening. Like this video, share this video, subscribe to this channel, donate to this channel so I can continue to do documentary reviews. Because these things, the network is $10. Anyway, thank you guys for listening, and I'll talk to you guys later.